Welcome to ET English, the unique English language learning feature of Education Times. This recording is brought to you by Panthea Gunathilaka, the founder of Cleon, Academy for Speech, Drama and Leadership. The Education Times comes to you every week with the Sunday Times, a leading publication of Vijaya Newspapers Limited. ET English introduces a unique way of learning English through stories. It has a short novel and also a picture story, both of which are being published in episodes every week. All the lessons and activities that are given in the feature are from these two stories. Many English scholars accept that when you learn a language through stories, you remember them better. Further, the picture story will complement this by adding the visual component as well, where it will help the readers create vivid images in their minds, helping them remember those dialogues and the words through these incidents. The first episode of ET English appeared in the Education Times section on the 13th of September 2015. Now we're going to bring the audio version of this feature, where you can listen to the stories and the lessons. First the picture story, secondly the novel, and finally the lessons. Both the stories in this feature are based on stories from the short story book by Mr. Asghar Hussain and published by Vijayapa Publications. To get the best out of this feature, we suggest that you get a copy of the Education Times and also a dictionary. Also, it will help if you read the feature once or twice on your own. At the same time, try to get the correct pronunciation by listening to audio attentively and repeatedly and trying to read it after every dialogue, emulating the voices that you hear. We shall start now. The next component, and all because of a fag, based on a story by Asghar Hussain. Illustrations by Anton B. Pereira.
Hey, Gamma, Gamma.
Hello, Brian. I didn't see you for some time.
Ha ha ha. Come, come. How about a wedding?
Hey, Brian, aren't you ashamed of eating that rubbish?
Gamini, you know our friend Ravi is in hospital. He is serious.
Anything to do with his lungs? How many times have I told him to stop smoking?
Buddy, it's nothing to do with his lungs.
Then surely the fellow must have got a heart attack. Or he must have set his bedroom on fire, throwing burning butts all over.
No, no, it's nothing like that, Gamini. Believe me, it's a strange story.
Then tell me what on earth has happened.
It's because of his gold watch.
What? Tell me the story.
The novel The Mirror of Paradise by Asghar Hussain. Episode 1. A Good Medical Boy. I have found a good medical boy for your daughter. This, I suppose, is what the marriage broker told a couple in Kandy after meeting my friend Rajpal. Rajpal had approached the man saying he was a medical student and that he was looking for a nice, respectable girl to marry. The problem was, he had nothing to do with medicine. Like me, he was a third-year student studying political science at Peradeniya. There was no truth in his wish to marry a nice and respectable girl either. All he wanted was to be entertained lavishly at the expense of some unsuspecting parents. I have never forgotten the consequences. It is now 15 years since, but I still try to avoid him as far as possible. My wife thinks I'm being cruel, but once I narrate what happened, I'm sure the reader will understand. It all began when we saw a strange, middle-aged man loitering near the campus gates. He was short and balding, with ruddy cheeks and a thin moustache. We noticed that he accosted students to make discreet inquiries. We soon learnt that he was a marriage broker named Bandara, and that he was looking for medical students to introduce to some affluent families in Kandy and its outskirts. It was certainly a sensible thing to do. After all, as doctors of the future, medical students were much sought after by parents with young daughters. The man who succeeded in making a match could expect to be rewarded well. One afternoon, as I was about to step into the campus library, someone came from behind and tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and saw Rajpal. "Yes, what do you want?" I asked sharply, for the fellow had got into the habit of borrowing money from me. "I want to talk to you, Machang," he said. He looked around furtively and led me to a corner. I felt nervous, wondering how much he was going to deprive me of. Then he told me about his discussion with the marriage broker and his plan to have a good time by posing as a medical student. I stared at him. "Are you mad, Rajpal? Do you seriously think you can do this without getting yourself screwed?" He was hardly worried. "Listen, Machang," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. "I can later come up with some excuse not to follow up on the proposal. The important thing is to have a good feast. They might even pour some expensive liquor. He. They'll go out to impress me, hoping to have a doctor as their son-in-law. Yes, and they'll give us the royal treatment." Now I got alarmed. "What do you mean, us?" I shouted. "Do you really think you can drag me into this?" He glanced around anxiously and asked me to lower my voice. Then he begged me to accompany him, saying it would give him a sense of confidence. By now, I was beginning to wish he had asked for some money instead. "Nothing will make me go with you," I told my batchmate firmly. "This can blow up in our faces, and besides, it's not a nice thing to do." "Please, Machang," he again pleaded with me. "I'm really sick of this canteen food. I want something different for a change. I know you sometimes have lunch at the Devon. That's something I just can't afford these days." I felt irritated. The fellow was trying to build some sympathy for himself while making me feel guilty. I stood firm, and he walked away looking quite upset. However, a few hours later, I began to feel sorry for Rajpal. I almost felt restless, for campus life can get tedious after a couple of years. And though his plan would not liven things up. It would certainly be an amusing experience, I told myself. It would be something to be fondly recalled long after we have graduated. I walked into his hall of residence to say I had changed my mind. Both his roommates were out, so we spoke freely. That's the end of episode 1. Now the lessons and activities. These lessons and activities are designed and compiled by Mr. Noel Jaimana, Senior Lecturer, ELT Resource Person, former Deputy Director English, Ministry of Education. We have 5 activities. Let me start with the first one. Activity 1. This is taken from the short story novel, A Good Medical Boy. Let's start with the questions. There are 10 questions to which you have 10 responses that you have to match. Question number 1. Who said, "I have found a good medical boy for your daughter"? The answer to the first question is response C. It was the matchmaker, or in other words, we call him the marriage broker. Question 2. Who was Rajpal? Rajpal we see as a medical student at the beginning, but is Rajpal actually a medical student? No. Rajpal was a third-year student studying political science at Peradeniya. The response is I. Moving on to question 3. Was Rajpal a medical student? No, we see the answer in J. No, he was not. That is the simple answer to the question whether Rajpal was a medical student. Question number 4. Were Rajpal and the writer batchmates? The answer to that is in D. Yes, they were batchmates. Let's move on to question number 5. What was the name of the marriage broker? As it states in response F, he was Bandara. Question number 6. What did he do? Now Bandara's job we see in response G. The answer is he looked for medical students and proposed them to some affluent families in Kandy. Question 7. When did this incident take place? We see the answer to that in A, that the incident took place 15 years ago. Moving on to question 8. Was Rajpal really serious about marriage? Let's look at response E. No, he was not. Question 9. What was his real plan? The very interesting answer to this lies in response B. His real plan was to have a good time posing as a medical student and have a hearty meal. Posing as a medical student, what do you understand by that? He was not a medical student, but he wanted to act like a medical student so that he could have a good proposal and at the same time a good meal at this event. The last question, question number 10. Why did the writer agree with Rajpal at the end? Actually, the answer to this is that in H, because he felt sorry for Rajpal and thought his plan would liven things up. Let's move on to activity 2. This talks about vocabulary enrichment. Remember, vocabulary is an essential part of the English language. If you know words, you could use them in your own context. When you speak, when you write, you could use them, and it will enhance your speaking skills and writing skills as well. Let's go through some of the words that we came across. I'm starting from the first word and we will proceed up till the 24th word. Suppose. Suppose means to understand, to believe. Approach. Approach means to come near, to come up to. Respectable. Respectable means good, decent, proper. Especially when we talk about people, we can say they are decent people. Respectable, good, proper. Entertained. Entertained means amused, delighted. Very much happy is what the word tries to show you. Moving on, we see the word unsuspecting, which can give you the meaning innocent, blameless. The sixth word is consequences, which you would have heard many times, which means penalties, concerns. Consequences are actually what would happen after you do something. As a result of what you do, you face your consequences. Affluent, rich, well off, wealthy. Outskirts. Outskirts means the environs, the suburbs. Outside the city life, you find the outskirts. The ninth word, sensible. Practical, workable. Sensible gives the meaning where you become a practical person, workable. You're able to work on your own. You're able to work with practicality. The 10th one, furtively, slyly, secretly. This shows when you do things that is covered up, that you hide things from others. Moving on, we see the word stared. Stared simply means gazed, looked. It's, in simple English, you just look at something or someone for a long time. The 12th word, screwed. It can have different meaning actually, but in this context, today's episode, it means in trouble, nailed. You get yourself in a lot of trouble. Moving on, we see the word feast. It means a banquet, a meal. It's just like a very, very entertaining party. The next word, expensive, means luxurious, lavish. The 15th word, alarmed, shocked, terrified. When you're so shocked and terrified, it simply means you're alarmed. Anxiously. Anxiously means nervously, impatiently. You just can't wait for something to happen. You're so anxious about it. The 19th word, accompany. To escort, to go with. It's like taking somebody somewhere, going with them. The 20th word, confidence. Simply means sureness, assurance. 21st word, afford. Not have enough money. Next we see the word irritated, crossed, annoyed. Simply words like frustrated. You just don't want to do anything. Those are the emotions it shows. Moving on, we find tedious. Tedious means tiresome, dull, boring, the same thing happening all over again. And the last word of today's episode that would enrich your vocabulary is fondly. Fondly means lovingly, tenderly. Let's move on to activity 3, language expressions. Remember, listeners, Learn to apply the language expressions selected from the story in your day-to-day life. It will add color to your speech, it will add variety to your writings, and it will make you a person who will speak the language with a difference. There are expressions starting with, he was looking for a nice, respectable girl. The second one, he was a third-year student. Now, in the applications of these, the first one, if you take, he was looking for a nice, respectable girl. The possible application, that means you can use this phrase, expression in examples like, I was looking for a decent job, just like looking for a nice, respected girl. The second one, he was a third-year student. In your situation, you can change it and say, my brother was the accountant there. The third expression, I have never forgotten the consequences. Well, simply you can say, we have never forgotten your support. So you are using the expression never forgotten in this example. In the fourth example, the important thing is to have a good feast. So we use the phrase the important thing, and you can make your own sentence and say, the important thing is to find a good person. The last expression from today's lesson we see, I'm really sick of this canteen. Simply you can say, I'm really sick of this job. I'm really sick means if you're fed up, if you don't want to do something, if you have no more interest in something. So, dear listeners, these 5 language expressions come with a lot of meaning and application in your day-to-day life, which I would encourage you to apply. Moving on to activity 4, we have the language functions and the examples of it. This, of course, comes from our picture story, and all because of a fag. There are 4 language functions here with examples, and these come in very, very handy or very useful in simple words when you speak the English language. First one, offering something to eat. You can ask, how about a wade? Well, instead of the food wade that's mentioned here, you could replace with any food that you like. The second one, warning. Let's see the example of this. How many times have I told him to stop smoking? This is a warning where you tell someone not to do something and they go on doing it. It could be in the form of correcting someone, putting them right, or simply expressing disgust because someone has not listened to what has been told. Then they are warned. The third one, asking for information. Now, asking for information, dear listener, is a very important language function, because wherever you go, whatever you do, irrespective of the place, you ask for information. And that is the way you can do your day-to-day tasks. Example, what on earth has happened? In simple terms, you're asking, what has happened? It's such a shock. The last language function from today's lesson, giving information. This is also very important. Whomever you talk to, interact with, you always have to give information. So you should know what words to use. And the example let's take, it's because of his gold watch. Activity 5, dear listener, is the more advanced one. But I would encourage you to try these questions, come up with answers, and why not give us a feedback on it too? Let me just go through the 5 different components in Activity 5. First one, aren't you ashamed of taking drugs? The second, aren't you frightened of smoking cigarettes? Number 3, aren't you scared of selling drugs? The fourth one, aren't you embarrassed of exposing your drawbacks? Number 5, aren't you ashamed of being criticized in public? Actually, these come for your use with a lot of thought and consideration. So the next time you hear that phrase, aren't you, it's always giving you something to think about. Dear listeners, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to our recordings. You're welcome to give us your feedback and suggestions on the phone numbers and the email address given in the ET English feature in the Education Time section. We meet again next week with episode 2. The recording was brought to you by Panthea Gunathilaka, the founder of Cleon Academy for Speech, Drama and Leadership. Until then, goodbye and happy learning.